Mike, I tried giving you the intro because I'm just going to let our viewers know that this is going to be one of Mike's pet cats here this season. This is going to be one of his top dogs. I might be teasing the video a little bit, but you're a little bit higher on him than I think I am.
I think I'm a little bit higher on Daviyon than most people are. Getting into Nixon's background and sort of statistical production, he's had an interesting journey here these last 4 years, to say the least. So he graduates high school, commits to Iowa. At that point, they deem his grades are no longer good enough to get into Iowa. He has to go to a community college. Plays his freshman year at Iowa Western Community College. Never heard of it. No offense. But then he gets his grades good enough to where he goes to Iowa, comes in, redshirts his first year. Second year as a sophomore there, redshirt sophomore, he's stuck behind a couple of seniors, is more of a rotational piece, comes out in 2020 and becomes the Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year. So, Mike, what the heck do we do with that journey there? Because that's sort of a real quick meteoric rise, we'll say, for Daviyon. How confident are you in just such a small sample size there?
It is small. A lot of the D tackles we've seen so far have had small sample sizes. I think his story probably shows the most potential. Reason being is when he had opportunity, he produced. Like the 29, 5.5 loss, 3 sacks, like in limited roles, that's not bad. Absolutely not. And then once he had that premier starting position, I'd say he produced. He definitely performed. So I'd say like by far out of all the small sample sizes, his I probably worry about the least because I think that just shows a pretty good trajectory. And when he was able to play, he produced.
Yeah, and I think that, obviously not being eligible is not really a positive, but the fact that he's been able to get eligible after having to probably kind of humble himself and play a year at a community college, he's been able to stay eligible and obviously, as I said, put up such solid numbers here, especially in a pandemic shortened season. So with that being said, getting into my grade, I know this is what Mike's been kind of hyping up, but no, as you'll see here, we'll just go straight down the list. So in terms of his ability to anchor and his strength at the point of attack, I thought Daviyon was really solid. At 6'3", 306, he was a lot more stout than I necessarily thought. I guess you could say, you compare him to say Barmore, who Barmore's just a bigger guy. Well, I thought that he was a much better run defender straight up than Barmore. It was very rare where he was getting driven back by double teams and at his worst I think he was getting stalemated by single teams, I guess, whereas there were plays where Barmore would just be eviscerated off the face of the earth and you just didn't see him, right? I didn't see that really with Nixon. I thought he was always relevant in terms of at least stalemating and maintaining his gap integrity. In terms of his pass rush ability, I thought that this might be a little bit of a high number in all honesty, but I do think that he showed good hand usage at times. The only problem is when somebody would get into his chest, he would struggle to get off of them, and I think that does come sort of with that size. Whereas a guy like, say, McNeil, his initial punch would be enough to create a ton of separation. I don't think you necessarily saw that to that level, say, of Nixon, if that makes any sense at all. In terms of his explosiveness and first step, I thought it was the best that we've seen so far, no question. I actually initially had it a little bit higher, but after watching particularly like the Purdue game, there were just a lot of snaps where I'm not sure if it was his role that he was designed to sort of mush rush, where his first step is sort of almost like a QB spy type role, where he's not attacking and penetrating a gap, but he's more so just sort of standing there and hand fighting at the line of scrimmage. I don't know if that was by design or not, so I did drop it down a little bit because if that wasn't by design, that was a pretty inconsistent first step then, to say the least. In terms of his block shedding, I thought was really solid. Whereas, say, a guy like McNeil, he was able to get that position and he couldn't do much with it. I thought that when Nixon got it, he was able to do a lot with it. Motor, I thought was solid. Finishing and tackling really good. And as you can see, really the rest of those grades, I thought he graded very favorably. So, Mike, an 82 is pretty high, especially considering the guys who graded this point. What are your thoughts on the grade?
It's pretty high. I'd agree with you. I think he's the best D tackle we've seen so far. I think probably the high, probably the highest ceiling by far. I think the athleticism shows. I think he looks strong at the point of attack. I think so that anchor strength I think really shows on film, and I think obviously when you have speed, often lack strength. When you have strength, you often lack speed, and I don't think he really lacked either on film. I think those might be his two best, best categories just consistently. And I think he has the ability. And I think the rest of it you can work on. I think those are the two hardest. You really can't learn them, to be honest with you. You either have it or you don't, and I think he has both. Obviously, you can get better at them, and then with anchor strength, if he could start, just getting that leverage, being the low man on the line of scrimmage, and then being able to use that, better position to disengage, kind of some of the stuff we were talking about with the lean. Um, that I think he could be a really solid piece. 82, probably a little bit higher than I'd have him, but I do think he's by far the best D tackle we've seen so far.
Yeah, I think that, for me, kind of it gets to the point where he's like, I would say he's like 90% of what Aleem would offer against the run. And I think he's right around the same of what Barmore offers as a pass rusher. And I think, for me at least, when you match those together, I guess you just get a player with a really high floor, and I think an even higher ceiling potentially. So then, obviously, though, we talk about a guy like Daviyon who's not on, I've seen him, PFF has him, I believe, 66. Yeah, I've seen him outside of people's top 100s. You get to the 33 guys we've graded to this point, and when you calculate the position premium, that has him at number one for me. Does that mean if I was a team at 15 and Nixon and Ojiari were both on the board, does that mean I would straight up take Nixon? I'm not 100% sure, because, again, if that consensus is a lot lower, I can really create some value there. And instead, maybe I'm going to take a guy like Ojiari, who I don't expect to be there at 17, whereas Nixon, if I could get him at 35 or 40, then I'm going to jump the gun there, if that makes sense. So no, I'm not advocating that your favorite team should necessarily go out and take a guy like Nixon that, if I'm the only one who has him graded this high, that they should take him that high, if that makes sense. Mike, do you agree with that at least, or no, that there is a potential to create some value with Nixon?
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. Trade if you really are dead set on D tackle, obviously these front offices do a lot more research into what teams are looking for than us. They always seem to have a pretty good grasp. So hopefully you'd have the grasp that Nixon probably isn't going to have that position value right there, especially when you're picking in those teens in the first round. So no, I wouldn't draft him there, but I do agree. Where am I having him? I'd probably have him early second round grade. I think that's where my final grade would sit. So kind of where your raw grade is probably where I'd have his final grade. Um, so I think that's a little high. I'd probably take Aziz or Quiddy above Nixon, but I think he's right there in line. And again, we've talked about it plenty when you're kind of in those grades, really early second, late first. Usually we're talking about going up. Um, the late second round grade if you are drafting in that back end of the first round. And he has that position value, maybe, whether it be pro day or whatever, kind of shows through a little bit, then I wouldn't be mad seeing him. Absolutely not.
And I should mention, I don't believe I brought up to this point, at his pro day, he did run a 4.90 40-yard dash. So obviously, we are kind of taking these pro day numbers with a grain of salt, being that they all seem super inflated. But 4.90 is very solid, to say the least, considering people are freaking out about Barmore's 4.93. I think that Nixon offers that similarly high athletic ceiling, and I actually think you see it on film maybe a little bit more, in all honesty. Like just as a single one gap penetrator, if you put him as a three tech, I just think that you'll get some real good results. And that's why I do have him this high. I was kind of surprised to see, obviously when I'm doing the grades, the big board's not in the picture, so I was kind of surprised to see how he stacked up against the rest of the class after the fact. But no, I really don't hate it. The more that I think about it, and the more that I've watched of him. Of course, I did want to mention that there's not a ton of Iowa games available, at least for me. Couldn't get my hands on a ton of film, so I did only watch 4 or 5 games there of him. If you were talking about like a confidence level, maybe it'd be a little bit lower than guys that say I've watched 7, 8 games like Aziz and Quiddy. But no, I was a big fan of Nixon. I just don't really know what his weaknesses are, and I like that as a floor right away as a defensive tackle. So Mike, with that being said, do you got anything else, or are we getting out of here?
Yes, most people's big boards, you're probably going to see Barmore over Nixon. And so we should probably talk about it. We're not going to agree with everyone. And I just think off film, and I think we both agree here, but I'm not sure what you saw from Barmore over Nixon. There definitely might be a little bit more splash plays, but I also thought Nixon had a nice amount of those, making plays in the backfield when you could see his tackles for loss or sacks. So he was a playmaker when he was on there. So if that, I don't know. I'm not sure why people would have Barmore over Nixon. Not even level of competition. Like you got Big Ten football, like compared to SEC. Obviously, you'd have the SEC over Big Ten, but um, for D tackle sakes, I don't know if I'd take that grade over. I'm just confused where really the disconnect is from what we saw on film comparative to what um, most grades are having them, and some of it could be that just Alabama is the true. And we talked about Aleem that NC State is the D line factory, but as we all know, Alabama's basically just a factory in general, but a D line factory quite a bit. So if that kind of if he gets a boost in his grade for that, it could be. I don't know because just off film, man, I think we both agree. You a little bit more than me that Nixon definitely stood out more.
No, and I did say I wish I could have watched more games. Well, even looking at the games that I didn't watch, he had at least half a sack in every single one of them except one. So it's like we're talking about him compared to say a guy like Aleem McNeil on other people's big boards. Aleem had one sack the entire season. See, so I just don't really know where the conversation is, and obviously the stats aren't everything, or they're not even a big portion of this evaluation. It's pretty much all film, and I think that that's where Nixon graded very favorably, and I'll be incredibly intrigued to see where he gets taken and really who takes him here, because like I said, I do think that he projects to be a really good player at the next level. So no, I think with that being said, now I think we're ready to mic up and we're miking out. Peace, guys.
Deuces.